I like this tacky.
Jano.
Yes.
Tupatie. Tupashe.
Tupashe basi. I was reflecting on how I used to approach going to church. As a worshiper, I'm going to church. I want to hear a sermon. I want to be encouraged. I want to be able to draw from the bishop, the pastor, the congregants. And I just think about how much it's evolved over time in Kenya and how people who oftentimes have wanted to seek solace in church sometimes find themselves in a political rally. They go to church and they say, okay, this church that I normally come to, which usually talks to me about encouragement, about the fact that I've lost my job, about the fact that I'm not feeling well, and encourages me, takes me back to the Bible and makes me find solace in the Word of God. But now I feel like I'm being caught in a political turf war because the person speaking at the pulpit right after the pastor left is spewing hate speech and a lot of the narrative that doesn't quite augur well with my soul. And it's happening over and over again. I put on my TV and there's a Thanksgiving prayer that is supposed to sound positive. It's supposed to sound powerful and impactful, but instead it's overtaken by politicking and name calling. And then finally, sometimes I go to church and I have to take cover for safety because unfortunately there's stones being thrown my way. And so no, we can no longer sit on the sidelines as the church, a place that's supposed to be refuge, is now, in a sense, a room where politicians have their say, and we as congregants, and I love how this was put by someone, are just congregants who are held hostage. We have to sit there and listen, because if we walk out, maybe that'll look bad on my part. Or sometimes a church that's quiet, when the Gen Z-led protesters are saying, we want our country back, and while some of them can be, can sort of like support it, others are quiet and silence is complicit. So what I'm saying is that churches, as we once knew them, are completely going against everything that it stands for, whether it's in the Bible, whether it's in our values, whether it's the culture. So no, we can no longer say that these are churches. We can say that there are political places, spaces where politicians hijack the narrative, and for that I'm saying, miss me with that.
Shika zako hizo. Shika zako hizo.
Nasikia uchungu, by the way.
It's coming from deep inside somewhere.
As a believer, it even makes you question your faith, and I think that's a whole other conversation.
All right.
But I think it's important, when it comes to faith, I know that you're supposed to follow the word. The person is a messenger. And I think we also need to really inculcate that other is a tajipata kwa cult. So don't ever look at somebody as the Messiah. They're a messenger of the word. But it does hurt to see what's happening in our churches. It does. For a moment there, after the Gen Z-led protest, after the Reject Finance Bill protest, I loved seeing some churches even give young people space on stage to talk about why they were doing what they were doing. And then the parents and sisters and relatives all saying, we're with you, we feel your frustration. But then more often than not, there's a lot of gaslighting, and like I said, politicking and co-opting, and it's really taken away a space that's supposed to be a refuge. For some people, their only solace is on Sunday. Right. And then you're taking that away from me. I'm trying to run away from these people. I see them every day on a news cycle, spewing at each other, even sparring with each other through the headlines, and then I go back and have to see them again. And so it hurts on a very deep level.
I get that. I'm trying to think, when did it begin to be a thing that churches were political playgrounds? I don't know, maybe my memory is inaccurate, but I think if I'm thinking through maybe the early 2000s, perhaps even some parts of the 90s, the church was quite vocal in regards to matters politics, but they were never a pulpit, I don't know, for politicians. Again, my memory could be failing me, so I'm happy to be corrected. But if I hear a name like Ndingi Mwananzeki, I don't know. That strikes me as not really a friend of the government of the day, or things like that, or Father Kaiser. Yes, those are some of the things that I remember. But now, I don't know when the shift happened to really, really big harambes that happen in churches, to funerals becoming a place also for people to come and discuss politics, to now Sunday sermons becoming
disrupted.
Yeah, disrupted and becoming a political
I like what you've asked, Mariam, and maybe Latif will be able to jog our memory a bit. But what I've also seen in that very same sense that you're saying is also globally. I think in the US, in the previous Trump election, the church was also accused of being very divisive because the evangelists outrightly endorsed then Trump. So I also try to think then, is this a pattern that I've seen with evangelicals? And I think there's historical references to it. Then on the flip side, you have church leaders who are also activists. You know, if you think about people like Reverend Joya, for what he's done to be able to use the pulpit to say we stand against injustice. I cannot believe that this iconic religious leader from South Africa's name is slipping my mind.
Desmond
Tutu.
Yeah.
I think politics and church has never been, it's very hard to draw them apart. I think what's troubling is now being co-opted so that even though you're a member of the church, a leader of the church, because a leader is also supposed to speak truth to power. And some of the names I've mentioned are leaders who did that. And for that, they paid a big price. They were persecuted, but they were with the people. They were saying we cannot take this kind of dirty politics, injustice, division, whether it's tribal or racial. But now the leaders are silenced or have been co-opted.
Right.
I think that's the biggest shift I've seen. Not that I've ever seen that kind of separation, but what I'm seeing now is more and more is the co-opting.
Okay.
But yeah.
I'm reflecting on this, and yeah, I'm looking back into those years, so the years of the 90s and the 80s, and what was happening in the country then in Kenya, and the push and the clamor for, you know, more liberalist politics, multipartyism, openness in governance and all. And the church played a critical role. And this is where you come in and remember people like, you know, the late Archbishop Alexander Muge or Bishop Okulu, or they've said, you know, Ndingi Mwananzeki, thereafter going into not Moses Kuria, but Manasseh Kuria and others, and Joya. And what they were doing then, they were speaking, but the politicians, even those in the opposition, because there are the politicians in the opposition, they would not come to church. The NCCK was very vocal. Ufungamano was church-led, was actually religious leaders now coming together to fungamana, you know, just come together and join hands in agitating for pluralism and change in the country. But you'd never see the opposition leaders then, Akina Jaramogi or Kibaki or Matiba, speaking from church.
Right.
They would attend church and then they would leave church. The person who is at the pulpit would preach and they would reflect on some of these things that are happening in the country, but the politicians present would not be given an opportunity to kujasalimia watu wako kidogo, and then they also bring their politics to church. And that's what you saw throughout Kibaki's tenure as president. In fact, it was you was asking the other day, was Kibaki going to church? Yes. Kibaki was very much going to church. In fact, Consolata Shrine here in Westlands was Kibaki's church. He'd go to church all the time. But go to church, come out of church. Uhuru, raised Catholic, goes to church, comes out of church. You would not hear that the Catholic Church has given the pulpit to these leaders. Then there appears to be a conflict. And this is, you know, the split between these old mainstream churches, so-called mainstream churches, and now the newer evangelical churches and the freedom that they bring. Why are people getting away or running away from those churches? Many people, you ask them, they're like, I am tired of just being shackled. You go in there and the rigidity. You know, it's too rigid. There's just the same way you enter. You shall even look at somebody like this. And you cannot shout. You only come out, stand out to sing, and sit down when you sit down. It's too much. And we want to go into this place where we are free to speak to the Lord, and you can bang the walls and all and all.
There's a youth pastor who says, God.
Yeah, there's a guy, you know. So probably this has now led into this emergence of new churches, these new churches, and everybody is opening a church. And so I think now to seek relevance, and because of where our society has been, that we have elevated politicians. So to get relevance and to get people to come to your church, if you can bring in that superstar, the influencer to your church, then you'll be like, hey, ujama, ata mheshimiwa ananga kanisa yake.
Even to the detriment of the gospel.
So everything else now becomes secondary. I want to be the guy who is known around here. I'm the one in whose church mheshimiwa comes. I'm the one in whose church, unajua kanisa yangu naletanga hata Musali alikuja last week, hata Wetangula nakuja next week, like that. That has eroded all these things. Now, who are we placing on the cross here? Is it the leadership of the church, or is it the leadership plus the congregation?
Wow. Probably
because what's driving them? What's driving people? The leadership is actually responding to, me, I want people in my church. What's going to attract people to my church? If Gachagua comes to my church 4 times in a year, I'm the guy who brings Gachagua to church. Okay.
Do people like it when there's a Gachagua or, you know, some other politician in church, or is it what they bring with them? Or we can't separate the two? Because, you know, if I see a certain level of political leader or any political leader, our harambe for that new building is sorted. Or at least we're getting somewhere. We're making progress. We've made a dent in the hole. The funding for this and that. So that's the question.
I think there's a huge link. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. As to who do we blame? I think it's obviously a little bit of both, because if people were unhappy, they would have done something about it. And when people were unhappy, they did. I think we saw young people come out in church during the protest and say, this is not a place for politics, and if you continue platforming these guys, you forget about us. We'll be outside. You know, we'll find our own ways to worship, or we'll stay home, or we'll figure it out. So that was a clear show of displeasure. But then before that, hadn't seen much pushback, to be quite honest. And then I wonder also the demographic of people who attend church, because a lot of young people don't attend church. As I think young, when you're with your parents, then you go with your parents. Then I think
thereafter
there's a bit of a gap.
Yes.
And then now when folks are a little bit older, then church becomes more regular. It's not universal, but
that's kind of a pattern. Those are interesting points around fundraising, especially because you know, that's why tithing exists. It's supposed to be a percentage of what you make, and collectively that is able to your point, either expand a church building. A lot of the time it comes from a good place. I've seen churches put that to work in a very, very open, diligent way. They don't do something that's extravagant. They don't do something that's over the top. They just say, our congregation is growing. Therefore, this is where we're moving. Come, you can even do a recce with us. This is how your money is being used. But I think it's definitely linked to that if somebody is coming and putting a lot of money, then you've closed the gap on the expansion that I was thinking about. And so some congregants might like it because it gives them that proximity. Some might not, and maybe they just have quiet dissent. But the leader, ultimately, of the church is the one who can sort of say, this is why I want to drive us in this direction. And an even better leader will dialogue with the congregation to say, do we want to go there? Interesting point about young people in church. There's a very big, I guess it's been called a revival. From COVID, a lot of young people globally started turning back to faith. I think people were questioning life. But what's even more intense...
Astrology wasn't answering all the questions.
Capricorn today, I don't know. I don't know if this is really saying. Right. But what it's done even more is it's forced the church to be accountable. Because the same energy that folks used for reject finance is they become... And radical sometimes is used as a bad word. I want to use it in a good connotation now. They become radical in faith. And then they say, hey, listen, my radical love of God makes me question how you're using our money. So now the church is like, wait, I know we prayed for you guys to come and follow us, but now you're putting us to task. That for me is what will heal the church. I'm seeing it a lot more. I've seen it in churches I've been to. I've seen it online. There was a lot of people who had massive numbers on TikTok, and all of that ended up being converted because they had their moment.
Into a physical church.
I don't want to choose this life anymore. I love what I've been doing for my brand, but I feel like there's a deeper connection I'm going to. And with that, they've carried with them a lot of young people. And then with that, they're using these mics in their podcast and all to say, prosperity gospel, enough. Stop doing that. People have hurt themselves and their pockets, number one. Number two, pastors who are not being held accountable for either inappropriate behavior and comments, stop with that. So it's, in a sense, Accountability will cleanse the church.
Sorry, I just
It
had
is
a
not
light
happening.
bulb.
Oh,
I just
sorry,
can you
yeah.
see the light bulb? Yeah. I just did ding.
Okay.
The nexus, that correlation between
Yeah.
the rise of prosperity gospel and evangelical,
Yep.
churches and all, and the increase in now politicians being platformed in church. I'm sorry, it's crazy that I hadn't made the connection.
Oh, yeah.
But when you're preaching like, my God is a generous God, and then someone comes with 20 million, why would you question that generosity?
Yeah.
And not to say that anyone's God isn't generous, but I think you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, because
That
it
there's
also makes people who have less feel like they're doing something wrong. That's been the biggest heartbreak of prosperity. God is generous. He's all those good things, but he has a way that he'll work on you that's different from how he'll work on you. So when somebody comes with a big car the next day, and last year you were on the same page, and the church is saying, if you guys can't be like this guy, what are you doing? Some churches do that. Some churches say, how are you coming here with a small car? True story. I was in one.
That's true.
But
and they attract. Let me tell you something. Even NTV has highlighted some stories in the past about some of these churches.
Yep.
And some of those practices where, in fact, a story is aired on a certain pastor who appears to be using some fake people to fake a miracle.
oh, yes.
And it's exposed.
100%.
And thereafter, people have then gone on to speak to that leader of that church later. And the leader of the church is like, NTV ran that story. Following Sunday, full to the rafters.
Wow.
People come.
Seeking a miracle.
Oh, yes.
Seeking a
so
miracle.
After an expose.
There's a segment of that. Now, let's look at what the Anglican Church, the Catholic Church, the PCA, the Seventh-day Adventist, and others, and the leadership of those churches, the Catholic Council of Bishops, the Archbishop of the Anglican Church, the moderator of the PCA, and so on and so forth. They've come out and clearly said, no politics in our pulpits, right? They've come out and clearly they've said that. And you'll see in Catholic, in Anglican, you will not see. In SDA, you will not see this politics. You're seeing it in these other churches. Now, thread it. These other churches, it's owned by, it's Eric's church. All right. In fact, even on the billboard, it's Eric and the wife, Bishop so-and-so and Mrs. Pastor, Senior
First
Pastor,
lady.
so-and-so, First Lady. It is their church. It's personal businesses.
Right.
So can we stop calling them church?
Oh,
Okay.
and call
So
them-
when you say, miss me with that, church, leave church alone. Target these businesses that are masquerading as churches, as places of worship. These people who have a business. And that's why it's of great interest to Bishop Mpako Mafuta Eric to have politicians so-and-so coming to the church because it's adding to my profile.
And my pocket.
And my pocket. When my profile goes up, then more people are coming into church, then I'm making more. And we're seeing a lot of that happening. Those are the people who are encouraging this nonsense that we are seeing, where people are coming to fight in church,
Throw stones.
throw stones in church.
Break cars' windows. That's not church. And I think it's, to your point, Eric, I think it's very important what you've said, because it's also to encourage people that there are still, church is still church, right? In the sense of, don't be completely discouraged and hopeless. There are still spaces where you can seek the kind of faith and encouragement you're looking for, but you have to be discerning. That's the other thing. It all goes back to discipline and reading your word. It all goes back to those things which I used to roll my eyes at. But now I fully understand. I'm like, actually, if you want to pursue this, there's a discipline. That's why they were called disciples. And discipline takes a lot. It's a lot of patterns and rhythm and reading and understanding and having good days and bad. There's an entire book in the Bible called Lamentations. It's a rant, so it allows for grief. It allows for
game.
let me tell you, an entire book.
Yeah.
And so I'm saying, as somebody who has my own relationship with faith and is figuring it out, it's for people to know. I think to Eric's point is discern the business from the church. And then for those who are doing that, you're playing with fire, good luck to you. For the churches that are holding steady and saying we wouldn't allow people to use these pulpits to pick sides and pull me apart, hold steady to that, because that's the only way that will be able to heal the pulpit in its totality.
So it's all about the money that they bring to church.
Right.
Our next guest is Waithaka Gatumia.
No.
He is a church person.
Oh, yes.
His first point will be his view on this. One of our fixers, Mike on the mic, he calls himself Mike on the mic. He's saying two things. One, politicians church clergy invite politicians into church because of what they bring. You know, the kakiru. The second thing is that we have become a highly politicized society.
Right.
We talk about politics anywhere we put them. Ukikutana na watu kwa gym, how to break ices. Hey, Kenya. Hey.
Right.
Story inaanza.
Uko kwa boda, you're holding on for your life.
That's how it starts, right?
Serikali nayo.
So probably that's also we, the congregation, have taken politics to church. And we've got to stop that. Jano, again, miss you with what?
Miss me with that. Nikirudi kuna Bible verse Dana metuma kwa group.
Very good. 2 minutes to 9 a.m. Keep it here in the next conversation. Uko na pesa ngapi? We'll tell you what to do with that money.